CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Our last show of 2024. Thank you so much for being with us for a crazy year ride with an election and party implosions and all sorts of things. Sometimes we do yearly recaps. We did a bit of one in last week's show, but there's a lot of news going on, and so we want to stick with some topics this week that we are going to dive into. Let's bring in the pod squad to do that. Jeff is away, so Mike McKinnon, senior consultant at Enterprise Canada, is here. Enterprise, not the spaceship, the consulting company. That's more of a Horgan thing.
Also not the car rental, but
not the car rental.
Nice tribute. No. That was a nice tribute to John.
Right. Yeah. Allie Blades, senior advisor at Frame Point Public Affairs, and Jillian Oliver, a consultant extraordinaire who is out there with a lot of work in the BC Green field as well. And then me, just a senior. That's it. I'm just a senior, something or other, over here working on the show. Thank you to the panel for being here. Let us start with something that actually happened last week, right when we were taping, as we weren't able to really get into it. That is the NDP-Green Cooperation and Responsible Government Accord. I just wanted to read it because it's not CASA. This is not the 2017 CASA. It's a little bit different. We can talk about that. We can talk about some of the things that are in it. There's annual renewals. It's a 4-year framework. There's still kind of green support on confidence motions in exchange for some movement on, some items, the big ones being healthcare and the community health centers and some coverage for psychologists under MSP. So let's start with that. Mike, we'll start with you as our guest panelist this week. Good deal? Who wins this deal? Should people care about this deal? What do you think?
Well, from the NDP government's lens, I think that it's clear that this brings an additional layer of stability. And if you ask folks around the ledge, I think you'd find that most people are much more confident that this is a government that lasts 4 years now that there's this deal in place. The reality is that the Green members did not have that much of a negotiating position. I was actually surprised to see that there were that many things in the deal at the end of the day. But also that's just a reflection of the fact that just as the leaders acknowledged in the campaign, despite the fact that David Eby was campaigning for the votes of that normally may have gone to Green MLAs. At the end of the day, Greens and New Democrats share a lot of values. And so in talking about ways to improve the healthcare system, community health centers, as you talked about as one of the aspects of the deal, not something that was in the NDP platform, but a lot of shared values about how you deliver primary care in BC. So, I think it's not a surprise to see some of those things in there because there's a lot of overlap in the values that the NDP government has, and a good deal for the Greens, I think, to be able to extract it, given the fact that at the end of the day, the NDP had a majority and did not need to make this happen in order to govern.
Yeah, it did change the bargaining position a bit because, we started with Sonia Furstenau saying, I'm not negotiating with the Conservatives. So she pretty much kind of threw out that part of it. And then the 22 vote victory in Siri Guilford left the NDP not even having to cut this deal. So immediately the Green sort of leverage was reduced. Jillian, what did you think? Good deal? Bad deal? Anyone come out on top on this?
Well, I think like Mike said, there's only so much that I think the Greens could hope for given the circumstances. I think, had they gotten any huge asks, there would have been a lot of blowback on some of their big differentiation points, like banning fracking, for example, something like that. That's a huge signature Green issue, would have, billions of dollars in consequences. It would kind of be the opposite of providing stability. So I think the Greens here really focused on tangible things that are top of mind for voters, increasing access to healthcare. They also, another big thing that they got was $50 million to expand MSP coverage of psychologists. That didn't quite meet their platform commitment of fully making 6 visits a year available to everybody. But for an opposition party, it's a huge step forward on a signature issue. And then they also got regional transit where the two Green MLAs have their ridings on Vancouver Island and in West Van Sea to Skye, which was a key promise made by Jeremy Valeriot, who won there, the first Green seat off the island. So I think, for considering these are two new MLAs who are opposition members, I think these are pretty significant wins for their first term. I think if we were, taking a step back and just looking at it under that lens, that's the way to look at it. There's some other things that are sort of a little bit vague, and it'll take some time to see what they yield and how big of a deal they are. There's a review of Clean BC, which is the climate plan. So we might see some new policies, more opportunity for green input on obviously a really key issue for them, a review of forestry and how forests are being managed, and also potentially permanent protection of Fairy Creek, which is, potentially a really big deal. If the Greens can say that they kind of, push that forward as part of this agreement, that's a huge boon to their base. And I think that sort of like Green environmentalist vote that, some of those folks might have voted strategically NDP this time. So I think they've kind of set themselves up to, in 4 years, say, hey, we got a lot done. If you like this, we need more Green MLAs.
Mm-hmm. All fair points. Only thing I would add is on the forestry one, became pretty clear when this was announced that the two nations involved at Fairy Creek weren't consulted, and the Pachidat Nation actually wants to log part of Fairy Creek. So I'm not sure how that agreement is going to go over. I don't think that one's going to fly the way the Greens think it's going to fly. But Allie, what do you think of the deal?
Well, let's just take that example where this is potentially bad news for the Greens, because now what the government will be able to do is say, well, the Greens made me do this, so let's push the entire blame on them. And let's tease out a little bit of what Mike was saying, in that the NDP didn't necessarily need this. So it wasn't necessary in order to continue on with a somewhat stable government cycle. And I think that the Greens have opened up themselves to a space where, on a federal level, that we're seeing Jagmeet tied to Justin Trudeau quite negatively, could impact them. And this missed opportunity, because it was a clean slate with two brand new MLAs. They could redefine what the Greens would do in the next 4 years. And instead, the headline will read, the NDP and the Greens have done X. The other question that I've been getting since the announcement last week is, was there an opportunity for the Conservatives to make a deal with the Greens? And not really is the answer, in that Sonia Furstenau, the leader of the Greens, never really was open to a conversation with John Rustad. And again, I don't know if that would have even really worked. I don't know where they would have compromised as well as the NDP and the Green have compromised here on this agreement.
The difference federally, though, being that if the Greens pull their support at some point, 5 months from now, 2 years from now, they can't bring the government down. They'll never sort of get pinned with, why are you supporting a government you could take out? Because they just don't have the votes anymore to do it. But you're right.
Purely perception, though. It's the communications aspect of it all. And that's what most people are going to see.
Just to go around quickly on this other issue here, proportional representation. We know the Greens want it. It would increase their seat count, hypothetically, from, maybe to 7 seats. They got 8% of the vote from 2. The NDP didn't want to do that, so they've put it in this all-party committee that will review increasing democratic participation and voter participation and issue recommendations, including a preferred method of pro-rep, but no commitments to do that. Mike, what line is being walked here, do you think, given that the Deputy Premier, Nikki Sharma, came out immediately and said, we fundamentally disagree with the Greens on pro-rep, but we're going to do this anyways?
Mm-hmm. Well, and you look at the language in there, like it doesn't commit to anything like that. It's like, we've committed to a meeting that will form a committee that will discuss, but a really important piece of that, obviously the AG said that this is not something that the NDP government supports, but also let's have a conversation about it as part of a larger conversation about many other things and many other ways that we can better engage voters in the electoral process. I'm not remembering off the top of my mind, but the point I want to make about participation in an election, a hotly contested election, and yet we did not see like what you often see in other jurisdictions, including this province. When you have a very close election, you usually see an increase in voter turnout, and we didn't see that in this campaign. And so I think a way to some good that could come out of that committee, regardless of wherever you stand on changing the way we vote and the representation in the legislature, is how can we find other ways to better engage the electorate, making it easier to vote with multiple advanced voting days. Like that's not changing the game anymore. It's just making it easier for the same people who always vote to vote more conveniently. So how do we find ways to engage people better? And if I, at the end of the 4 years or however long this lasts, if that committee comes with tangible things that actually lead to more people casting their ballot and being involved in elections and the political process, then I think it's a job well done by everyone who was at the table for that.
Free lottery ticket with every vote.
Doesn't Australia pay people? Or is it just compulsory there? But
the government's already tried to offer paying people for things, and it hasn't really worked before. So I don't know if it's going to work here.
Yeah, Jillian, we should be able to do something to increase voter participation. Like, I guess it's good that we're studying it.
Yeah, I think that, like, again, given that the NDP has a majority on paper and the Greens are two opposition members, I think this is kind of like the best they could hope for on this. Like, I was honestly surprised to see it in there at all. I think from their perspective, it keeps it in the conversation. We had, I think, looking back at the last referendum, I think that became very much about, the Greens or the perception was that the Greens and the NDP were trying to, get more power for themselves. People didn't trust the process. I think this maybe gives an opportunity to keep it in the conversation, but reframe it by taking the heat of, we're going to implement this in 4 years off of it, and just kind of talk about it as a concept, talk about how other countries are, improving their democracies and doing democracies differently. There's lots of other things that people are doing around the world. And I think that it's never wrong to have that conversation about how we can do things better and increase participation.
My only concern, Allie, is that by including ProRep in this, have they immediately triggered the Conservatives to basically oppose whatever is going to come out of this all-party committee? And if that is the situation, how can we transform our election process when we're going to have a split committee here that's not unanimous? I'm just playing this down the road. Mm-hmm. That doesn't agree, because really we should have all-party agreement before we start fiddling with the electoral system. We shouldn't have just two parties with just enough votes to jam.
Conservatives don't even have agreement within their own party right now. 2 months from the election, they might decide it's better to have ProRep in 4 years.
That'd be a fun committee. That would be a fun committee. What do you think, Allie? The all-party aspect of it.
Yeah, it could very well stop it. And maybe that's what the NDP were kind of banking on, was the fact that they saw what the sequence of steps would be afterwards. So that could be very interesting. The only other thing that I have to add to Mike's point about let's look at some other options to revitalize how we vote, essentially. There was a by-election federally here not too long ago, December 16th. And because of the strike, no one got an announcement that there was an election happening. And so the voter turnout was embarrassing for Canadian democracy, because that we rely on that one thing so much. Meanwhile, there are all of these tools, and Elections BC and Elections Canada have your information. They could have very well done a call blast or something to let you know, but now I suspect people are going to receive their Elections Canada's notice that they can vote on December 16th.
I want to move into the new budget numbers from this week, the second quarter financial results. The deficit is increased, projected to $9.4 billion. That is around $1.5 billion more than in the budget passed in the legislature earlier this year. There's lots of talk about a slowing sort of economy, stalled out consumer spending, reduced revenues, extra expenses on healthcare. It was a concerning economic update, I think. Mike, we'll start with you on this. A, are the numbers concerning? B, the argument that the Conservatives came out with as an opposition saying, we should have known this during the election. Like, why were we talking in the election, hearing the Premier talk about BC having the fastest growing GDP in Canada when it turns out a month later, we get an economic update and we have the slowest GDP in all of Canada. So both the numbers and the opposition critique, what did you make of that?
Well, I'm going to touch on the piece about GDP and what we knew during the election first, because I think that, you know, regardless, not a ton has changed here. I recognize that the deficit number is larger, and that's concerning. And I think we heard from the finance minister and from the premier that they acknowledge that as well. That there's not trying to sweep under the rug. Oh, by the way, like another $1 billion onto the deficit. I think they're taking that quite seriously, and I'm sure we'll discuss further some of the actions to help show that, including the public service hiring freeze. But you know, one thing that I took away from this is that there actually are more things going on to try and show British Columbians and actually drive the economy and show people that that's happening. We've got 17 critical mineral projects on the horizon is just one thing I think of. Like, there is light at the end of the tunnel after a really difficult year for BC's economy and really across Canada. When you look at the situation with rising inflation, finally seeing that come to a head. I think everyone sees a brighter sky down the road with respect to that. And so there is light at the end of this tunnel. I think we kind of have all party agreement that especially after the election, when there was not any party saying, no, the budget's going to be balanced. There is all party agreement right now that we're not in a situation where balancing the budget tomorrow is a good thing for British Columbians, because that would mean cuts across the board. And Rob, I know you love the Simpsons references. So I want to hand out an award. I hope that's okay. I know you've allowed me to go first a couple of times as a guest on the show. So I would like to bring to the table the first annual Rob Shaw Award for Outstanding Achievement in the Field of Excellence. And I would like to hand it to Peter Millibar and John Rustad, because just 3 months ago in the election, they were proposing a deficit that was actually $2 billion higher than we have today. And then to come out the other day and to be talking about the deficit situation and saying this is the worst thing in the history of BC with a straight face, I find it to be an excellent performance. And I just think it's really important that we actually level set the situation in this province, that there is no party that has like the moral high ground right now on deficit spending. It's going to take a lot to get out of this. And what I do expect we're going to hear in the spring is a more clear path as to how we are going to get to a much healthier financial position in BC.
The award for excellence in the field of excellence, I think, is the correct
outstanding achievement in the field of excellence.
There you go. Right. Fair point. Allie, what do you think?
There's a difference between the wanting to balance the budget and not being able to balance the budget. And that's where we're at right now, is that we are so behind, so in the red, that the reason why no party said that they would be able to pull off miracles is because we can't lie to the voters anymore and say that if with some fiscal responsibility in this department and a little bit of crunching the numbers here, that we'll be able to pull this off. This is a crisis, folks. And for those reasons, I think what's happening here is that the NDP is saying, sure, there might be some light at the end of the tunnel, but 2 decades from now, generations from now, based at the rate that the NDP are going, this political maneuver that they did with the hiring freeze is a bunch of baloney, where essentially there's every loophole known imaginable that they could then say, well, we tried, and we did technically do a hiring freeze, but then at the end of this, we'll be here a year from now and we'll realize that the hiring freeze was never actually a hiring freeze, but a political masterful communications exercise from the NDP saying that, well, we're going to try this and we're going to try that. And then it's not going to work. Why? Because we're in so much debt. And so the timing of this is also critical for folks to understand. The NDP are going to say that they have a plan to get our budget back onto the right track, because the real numbers will come out in the budget in the spring, and they can't necessarily clean that up as well as they would hope that the numbers are the numbers. And so they're going to front load it with a bunch of headlines as much as they possibly can to say that we are fiscally responsible and these are all of the things that we're aiming to cut. But it's all basically a lie.
Yeah. Well, Jillian, what do you think of the hiring freeze? And my colleague Vaughn Palmer wrote a column outlining all the different ways that the hiring freeze has those loopholes, like critical positions designated by government or deputy ministers, or frontline positions or priority positions, or anything to do with equity, or anything to do with, like, there's a ton of things. And it also doesn't preclude raises, as we saw the Premier's office give some raises out this week too. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can actually spend money under a hiring freeze.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a bit of a PR stunt to show that they're kind of thinking, they're acknowledging the situation. But I think the reality of the situation that we're in is that there's just so much uncertainty right now. The increase in the deficit is because of declining revenues. Right now, we're facing a potential trade war with the U.S. We're facing the size of our GDP is very vulnerable to the volatility of international gas prices and things like that. That's another thing that our budget has taken a hit on the last couple of years. So it's really, really hard to sort of predict these things. And I think, you look at what are the government's other options. They could make all the cuts in the world and still end up with a deficit of the same size because of those externalities that are just not under our control. So I think the government is giving themselves maximum ability to maneuver because, maybe they need to hire lots more people to boost infrastructure, to build some of these critical mineral projects or other infrastructure projects, which are stimulating for the economy in the long term, hire more into healthcare because people really need those services. So I think, because of the uncertainty, yes, this is a bit of a PR stunt, but I also think that from a policy perspective, they're right to give themselves the wiggle room, just considering how nimble we need to be because of how up in the air everything is right now.
Yeah. Okay. We'll continue this discussion on the audio podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube or CHEK TV, make sure you subscribe to that. We'll carry on and discuss this and some federal political issues as well. But I want to thank the panel for being here, and thank you to you for watching in 2024. We've appreciated your support and enjoyed having you along the ride as we talked about BC politics. And we will be back next year, mid-January 2025, with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital.